Hello. Today, I offer you a story about a wall. But really, it's a story about identity. The story begins before the apartheid wall was built. It begins long before the first Jews prayed at the Western Wall. It's much older than that. Our story begins with tiny unicellular creatures called foraminifera that have been swimming in the sea for hundreds of millions of years. The ocean is a dangerous place, so foraminifera enclose themselves in a protective wall of calcium carbonate. This shell separates them from the rest of the world, clearly stating what is self and what is other. Maintaining this boundary is the sole task of a foraminifera's life. When the boundary fails, so too does the creature. When it does, this now vacant armor sinks down to the bottom of the sea, joining trillions of other shells just like it. These shells compress each other, layer upon layer, until finally they fuse and become solid calcium carbonate rock, limestone. Over the eons, this ocean bed of limestone is slowly lifted above the seashore, creating the mountains that line the coast of the Mediterranean. The lands of Israel and Palestine are literally made from the bodies of ancient sea creatures. When humans arrived, they transformed that limestone once again into walls. Lime is the active ingredient in cement. It is made by baking pulverized limestone and then mixing it with water. This mixture is then cast into impenetrable barriers. In January of 2015, I was given a free trip to Israel by the Birthright Organization. My parents were Jewish, and so I was given a right by birth to travel through lands that people who were actually born there had no longer a right to live in. This video is my attempt to process that paradox, the paradox that is Israel and Palestine. The next step involves a bit of history. In 1947, the UN proposed this map dividing the region of Palestine into two states. The ensuing wars obliterated the proposal, but the map still captures the reality of the situation with terrible poignancy. The border lines are grotesquely elegant. Each half-nation both encloses and is enclosed by the other. At 2 points, both nations are penetrated, and yet both remain contiguous. They are inseparable. War began as soon as Israel declared independence. In 1949, the border looked like this. Let's zoom in on the West Bank. The armistice that gave Israel its independence left the west bank of the Jordan River occupied by the state of Jordan. In 1967, Israel captured the territory. In the decades to follow, the borders grew increasingly impossible. The 1995 Oslo Peace Accords divided the West Bank into 3 areas: C, B, and A. Area C is under full Israeli civil and military control. This means Israel keeps troops in Area C, and Israeli laws apply within its borders. Israeli citizens are allowed to build in Area C, Palestinians are not. All the Israeli settlements are in Area C. The settlers who live there are treated as Israeli citizens living in Israel, and they won't be leaving anytime soon. Area B is under Palestinian civil control and joint Israeli-Palestinian security control. Palestinians have more rights in Area B, but IDF troops are still present. Area A is under Palestinian civil and security control. It is illegal for Israeli citizens to enter Area A. In 2003, construction of the apartheid wall began. Yet, despite the wall and all of its symbolism, it's still impossible to tell which land is Palestine and which is Israel. Thousands of Palestinians were enclosed on the Israeli side of the barrier. Thousands of Israelis enjoy full citizenship on the Palestinian side. Ironically, that 1947 UN proposal actually shows less interpenetration than what we see today. This is the sound of Jewish children singing at Abraham's tomb. Abraham was supposed to have been buried here over 4,000 years ago. The building surrounding the tomb has been split in two. Half is a mosque, half is a synagogue. The tomb itself is enclosed in an iron cage that is divided in the center by thick bullet glass. Despite these barriers, I could still peer through and listen to the children sing. At the IDF checkpoint, I was wearing a keffiyeh, and so I was directed into the mosque. Had I removed my head covering, I could have been singing with those children. When I was in Hebron, I met a man named Hashem who lived directly next door to an Israeli settlement. The IDF had put a sniper tower on the roof of his house. He told me horror stories of settlers poisoning his grapevines and beating his wife. But what surprised me the most about what he told me was the way that he saw the conflict ending. He said that the borders were simply too convoluted. It was fruitless to try to divide the lands in two. The only way forward was to unify the nations. He said he would happily live with settlers as his neighbors, provided that every one of them had equal rights. The land of Israel is defined by its walls. The self-other distinctions of ancient sea creatures became the bedrock upon which the nation was built. This wall has divided Jerusalem from centuries of invaders. This wall divides Jews from Muslims. This wall divides Israelis from Palestinians. These walls reify distinctions that come to us all too instinctively. This is us. This is them. This defining instinct was given to us by our ancestors of the sea. For them, as for us, the breaking of the boundary means death. This fact haunts us, fools us into thinking that our boundaries must be impregnable. But look at this foraminifer again. It's riddled with holes. This is an empty shell. Alive, they look quite different. Foraminifera are amoebas. The creature within extrudes itself through its holes. Holes allow the external world to be internalized as food. It's true, without the boundary, the creature would die. But if the boundary were sealed shut, it would die as well. Humans make boundaries out of symbols as well as limestone. In rare cases, we require stones to physically protect our bodies, but usually we use them to preserve who we think we are. These symbolic boundaries are no less crucial than a calcium carbonate shell, but just like shell, symbols must be permeable. Holes are liminal spaces, neither without nor within. Barriers aren't supposed to create perfect isolation. Rather, they create a channel through which self and other are co-created. There is only one way this conflict can end. Eventually, the wall will fall and the states will merge. But left in the rubble, there will still be two peoples, still calling the same place home. The wall's paradox will still remain, the paradox of an inside and an out that refuse to be separable. This is the paradox that every creature faces. It is the paradox of being alive. As we strive to distinguish ourselves from what we are not, it is all too easy to become trapped in opposition to everything around us. But a close examination of our self-made boundaries reveals the countless holes that keep us connected to our world. In reality, inside and outside can only exist when they interpenetrate.